Facebook. That's the only time when they say stuff to me like that. Everybody else, like I've been on the internet for so long that people are just gonna talk and say some of the worst things. And most times they would never say it to your face. They would never. Most people now it's starting to, but now I'm starting to see a shift though, especially from looking at the protest and the speeches that you're trying to give and when people are trying to shut them down. What I'm seeing is what normally used to just be fantasy becoming reality, and like in the entire spectrum. Where like say if you've ever, I don't know if you've ever actually been on Tumblr.com. I don't know if you've actually logged on there, but say a lot of
no, I don't know Tumblr at all.
yeah, I it is I would say that a lot of stuff that you hear nowadays, like when you hear about gendered pronouns, the Zer and all the weird things that are coming up foot and the other kin and people just being just mean and just nasty. A lot of that stuff I would see that was Tumblr. Like I've never heard of any type of, 100 different type of pronouns until Tumblr, and I don't know where this was like the safe space for them, I guess. And now
why do you think Tumblr is like that? Why do you think that's focused there?
I've wondered that myself. I have a friend that I respect her greatly, but she's one of those people that changes her name and her pronouns and the this and that, and had a boyfriend that he has a beard and stuff, but he's like, call me she. And I'm like, okay, sure. But and I'm trying to figure out like where I can't find the root and seeing like, was there like a giant presence, maybe a public figure that maybe started talking about these ideas? Because I don't know. The earliest thing that I could really find, I remember like say back in 2011, I started seeing a trend happen in Texas, where it was being wolves. It was around that Twilight movies. The Twilight started to come out. Maybe it was even younger because I think the Twilights came out a while ago, the movies. But I started seeing that a bunch of people are starting to dress like wolves. They're putting tails on and all these things. And I was starting to see stuff like that. And maybe it was just the pop culture, things like that were making it socially acceptable. And then it started to be discussed on forums and everything. And then maybe Tumblr, I don't know how it became the ground zero, but it seems like that for me. And now it's just being translated into academia. Like you're starting.
Okay, so that's interesting because, one of the things I've wondered about with all this identity transformation, and this includes not only the sort of gender, let's call it play, that you're talking about, but also that otherkin universe. It looks a lot to me like the sort of fantasy play that's characteristic of kids when they're about ages, say from about 4 to about 9, or maybe 4 to 11. That would be the maximal extent of it. And I wonder to some degree if what's happening is that because I don't think that modern kids get enough chance to engage in fantasy play, like pretend play, like they did 30 or 40 years ago, that maybe that's being pushed aside by mass media. It's being pushed aside by computers and video games. It's being pushed aside by cell phones. And it's also less common because children's play is so structured now, partly because they don't have very many siblings and play dates are set up and kids' lives are hyper structured. And so kids have to go through that pretend play period. And I'm wondering if maybe because we've suppressed that in our society, if it's blossoming out in universities when kids get away from their parents and can start to experiment with their own identity, if they're doing that through because it looks like pretend play. I'm going to pretend to be a boy. I'm going to pretend to be a girl. I'm going to pretend to be an animal. I'm going to pretend to be a werewolf. It's fantasy play. And there's a lot of objection when people say, well, I'm not going to play your game. You can play your game, but I'm not going, you don't have any right to compel me to play your game. But it may be that there's a developmental impulse that's being manifest there that didn't get its chance to express itself at the proper stage of development. Something like that. Because it really is strange.
It is, and I feel like there's definitely is some type of correlation because when I was a kid and when we were going out, we were like I'm old enough to where we didn't have any type of technology other than like say the Super Nintendo was was like, oh, this is amazing. And I would take the bus. I don't even think kids can do this anymore. Just take public transportation. I would be back by sundown. I would go to another city. Sometimes I would just go ride my bike, and me and my friends would have like missions. We would do crazy stuff,
Right,
and we
right.
would hugely like. I wish I recorded some of this stuff so I can remember it. But my point is that yeah, definitely kids don't have anything like that. And like you said, the with the mass media, with the video games, as much as I love video games, there is so much structure that you can't really branch out and really create. You're very limited to what you can do. Even with like video games when you can like create a character and stuff, sometimes that's as far as it can go, but you're still kind of limited to where you can go. You can't fantasize. It's why I say I still love reading books
Right.
because you can just you create your own world in it. And then sometimes if somebody's read the same book, you can compare and contrast and be like, how do you see this character? Even though if sometimes they describe them, you'll still have an imagery
Yeah,
of how
exactly.
they look. And
Yeah, well,
I
that's
think
a
that
good point because I think what happened in part was that, kids engage in pretend play when they're too young to read, but then when they start reading fiction, they are still engaging in pretend play because they have to imagine the characters. Whereas
yeah,
in movies and in video games, the characters are basically put forth for them, and that there's utility in that because there can be additional structure, but the problem is that additional structure also stops you from having to use your imagination, and it's through your imagination that you experiment with all the different things that you could be. And maybe that's just being pushed later into development now, and that's why young people are so outraged when you violate their pretend identity. They look like kids playing to me, except that they're too old to be doing that.
yeah. I mean, and that's why it's so absurd to me that say something like C16 it could even be like passed or that there's even a need for it that there's because like you said it does seem like make believe and pretend
Mm-hmm.
and it's like how can you take this seriously how could you take this seriously and what's happening it also seems like such a major regression like something that
Yeah, right.
you're trying to hammer down on like say on free speech you can get in trouble by misusing someone's pronouns and then now recently M103 motion the motion has been brought up and what has been going on with M103 have you been keeping up with that.
Oh yeah. Well, one of the things that's happening that's really interesting is that, as far as I'm concerned, so I'm going to do a couple of lecture series or